Imagine a courtroom in the early 1900s, the air thick with tension, the walls echoing with the voices of powerful men debating the limits of justice, privacy, and power. And standing before them is a man who doesn't look like the typical titan of law. He isn't loud. He isn't charming in the usual political sense. But when he speaks, the room falls silent. His words are sharp. His mind is razor-focused. His mission? To make the law serve the people, not the powerful. This is the story of Louis Dembitz Brandeis, the man they called the people's lawyer, a Supreme Court justice whose ideas reshaped how America thought about justice, privacy, and democracy itself. Louis Brandeis was born on November 13, 1856, in Louisville, Kentucky, to Jewish immigrants from Bohemia, what is today the Czech Republic. His family fled Europe after the failed revolutions of 1848, bringing with them not just hope, but a deep belief in liberty and learning. Young Louis grew up surrounded by books and debate. His parents encouraged him to think, not just to follow. It was a household that valued freedom and intellect more than money or status. That atmosphere shaped him. It made him a lifelong defender of the underdog, the everyday citizen who had no voice in the halls of power. At age 18, Brandeis traveled to Harvard Law School. He didn't just study law, he devoured it. He graduated with the highest grades in the school's history at the time, and without ever having gone to college before law school, a rarity even then. After Harvard, Brandeis began his legal career in Boston. He could have easily joined the ranks of the elite, defending corporations and wealthy clients for big fees. That's what most bright young lawyers did. But not Brandeis. He saw the growing divide between the rich and poor, between corporations and ordinary citizens, and decided to use his legal skills for a different purpose. He started taking on cases for free, representing workers, small businesses, and consumers against powerful interests. That earned him a nickname that stuck for life: the people's lawyer. Brandeis wasn't against business itself. He believed in enterprise, but he feared bigness. He thought concentrated power, whether in government or business, was a threat to democracy. He once said, "We must make our choice. We may have democracy, or we may have wealth concentrated in the hands of a few, but we can't have both." That line, spoken over a century ago, still feels hauntingly relevant today. In 1908, Brandeis made legal history with the Mueller v. Oregon case. At the time, women working in factories often faced brutal hours, sometimes 10 or 12 hours a day. Oregon passed a law limiting women's working hours, and a business owner challenged it as unconstitutional. Brandeis, defending the state of Oregon, approached the case differently than anyone before him. Instead of relying purely on legal precedents, he presented social science evidence, hundreds of pages of research, statistics, and testimonies showing how long hours harmed women's health and family life. This became known as the Brandeis Brief, and it revolutionized the way courts considered evidence. For the first time, the human and social consequences of laws mattered just as much as legal theory. That approach paved the way for future landmark cases, from labor rights to civil rights, where social realities played a central role. By 1916, Brandeis had become one of the most famous and controversial lawyers in America. President Woodrow Wilson nominated him to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the reaction was explosive. The Senate held hearings that lasted 4 months, the longest and most bitter confirmation battle in American history at that time. Why? Because Brandeis wasn't just another lawyer. He was a reformer who had taken on railroads, monopolies, and banks, and that made him enemies among the country's elite. Some opponents attacked his political views, others made barely veiled anti-Semitic remarks, but Wilson stood by him, calling Brandeis a great man of fine ideals and a deep human sympathy. And eventually, Brandeis was confirmed, becoming the first Jewish justice on the U.S. Supreme Court. Once on the bench, Brandeis didn't mellow with age. He became one of the court's most independent thinkers and one of its most visionary. He was a strong defender of free speech, believing that democracy depended on open debate and the right to dissent. He was also one of the first to articulate a right to privacy. In a famous article written even before he joined the court, he warned about the dangers of new technology invading personal lives. In 1928, in a case called Olmstead versus United States, Brandeis wrote a powerful dissent against government wiretapping. He argued that the Constitution's promise of liberty should protect not just physical spaces, but the right to be let alone. That idea would later influence generations of privacy laws and Supreme Court decisions. Brandeis also believed that the law should adapt to social change, that it wasn't frozen in time, but a living instrument meant to serve people. Louis Brandeis retired from the Supreme Court in 1939, after more than 2 decades of service. But even after stepping down, he continued to inspire reformers and thinkers. He mentored young leaders, supported the Zionist movement's effort to build a Jewish homeland in Palestine, and remained deeply engaged in public life. Brandeis saw democracy not as a system that runs on its own, but as something citizens must constantly defend and renew. When he died in 1941, newspapers across America called him the conscience of the nation. He left behind not just a body of legal opinions, but a moral compass that continues to point the way toward fairness, accountability, and justice for all. Louis D. Brandeis was more than a Supreme Court justice. He was a bridge between law and humanity, between intellect and empathy. He believed that law was not an instrument of the powerful, but a shield for the weak. His life reminds us that real progress doesn't come from noise or status, but from courage. The courage to stand alone, to question authority, and to fight for what's right, even when the odds seem impossible. As Brandeis once said, most of the things worth doing in the world had been declared impossible before they were done. And maybe that's the truest lesson of all.